Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me again this evening for another Facebook live chat. I welcome each and every one of you. Thank you very much for all the support that you have given me over the past few weeks. Since the first night when we went live on, we've had very good success. Over 90,000 followers who have come on and viewed our video and engaged in live discussions, which I'm very grateful and thankful. And I want to also express my appreciation for the very constructive suggestions, discussions, questions that have come through. So this is a follow-up chat. I want to follow up this discussion on the economy because it has generated a very good discussions, and I believe that it is important because when the economy performs well, the country does well. So this is a topic of a discussion that is very much on the foremost minds of every Papua New Guinean and every business community, every investor in the country. So it is important that we continue the discussion. But also in light of the final output of the fiscal output of the 2020 that was released by the Treasurer, and some interesting data that was presented recently, it is worthy that we have a close look at those data so that we understand the real truth behind how the economy is performing and how we all can contribute to making some suggestions about improving the status of the economy going forward. Firstly, I also want to take this opportunity to express my sympathies and our thoughts and our prayers to the family of those two young girls who were involved in the accident outside 9 Mile. Very horrific accident. I wish that all our viewers and people who are on this live chat put these girls in their thoughts. We hope that they are stable and they're able to recover from this shocking experience. But our prayers and thoughts are going out to the families and those children as we go on this chat tonight. But returning back to the final budget outcomes for Papua New Guinea in 2020, let me start by saying that the outcomes itself is not looking good. It certainly shows that the economy is in a very severe contraction, meaning that it is slowing down and it is in recession. The growth figures that we were projecting in the 2020 budget by our government has not materialized. And as a result, the growth has slowed down and most of the numbers do not look good. But I will go through each number, and then at the end of this discussion, I will put in my summary of the numbers for you to have a look at it and show the growth and the declines that's happening in each section of our economy. And that you'll be able to appreciate this data that is going to be presented. These are not my data only, it is a data that has been published by the final budget outcomes itself that the Treasury and the Treasurer has presented. It is also a data that is now available on the sites of World Bank and IMF, and of course ADB and the Bank of Papua New Guinea. So various independent institutions have been able to analyze the data and assess our economy and its performance, and they have come up with these numbers that I am summarizing and presenting to you. In 2017, our gross domestic product was almost 75.6 billion kina. That was in 2017. In 2018, it was 82.3 billion kina. 2019 was 84.5 billion kina, which is the time when we changed government in May. And of course, now the 2020 budget outcomes show that there's a decline in our GDP numbers from 84.5 in 2019 to 81.6. A contraction of almost 3 billion kina, which is quite a substantial amount of contraction given that this is quite a small economy, and every income and every growth and every sector of the economy and the numbers that we present is of course very significant. Doesn't matter how small the numbers are. 3 billion kina decline in our GDP is a substantial decline. This comes about when you look at the revenues. Let's start with the revenue of the nation over the last few years. And when we look at the revenue in 2017 again, we had a total revenue of almost 11.5 billion kina. And then in 2018, we had 14 billion kina. 2019, we had a decline again of a little bit of decline of close to 13.6 billion kina. But again, when we look at the 2020 figures, there's further decline down from 13.6 billion kina in 2019 to almost 12.1 billion kina in 2020, which is again a decline of revenue of almost 2 billion kina, which is a substantially less revenue than what we were projected to receive in the 2020 budget. Again, this decline is again very serious. The numbers of 2 billion kina in any economy represents quite a substantial percentage of a decline of revenue that we very much need in making sure that we pay for the services, goods and services that the country requires. Grants from foreign countries and our development partners in 2017 was 1.4 billion kina. In 2018 was 1.8 billion kina. And in 2019 it came down to 1.7 billion kina. And of course, again in 2020, that declined from 1.7 billion kina in 2019 down to 1.4 billion kina. Again, the foreign grants coming into PNG was reduced by about 300 billion kina, whilst the foreign debt that we were getting increased. So it means basically that we were swapping almost grants, free grants, to loans that we have to repay into the future. So again, there was a drop of about 300 million kina, reducing further our revenue that is due to the country in 2020. As against that, we had a expenditure. So that is the side of the funding that we have, the envelope that we have got. Almost in 2020 was about 12.1 billion kina, including the foreign grants, which we needed to spend to fund for our expenditure for the country. And this is where the real concern comes in. Just to highlight the fact again that in 2017 our total expenditure and net lending was almost 13.3 billion kina. In 2018 was 16 billion kina. 2019 was 17.8 billion kina. And again, instead of reducing the expenditure levels in 2020, because we have already got a decline of 2 billion kina in revenue, we instead increase it by 2 billion kina to almost 19.4 billion kina in 2020. So instead of trying to live within our means, we have now spent more than what we are earning, and of course that means more borrowings. And this is where the deficit, where we have to finance the deficit, where it's the gap between the revenue and the expenditure. This is highlighted by the fact that fiscal deficit for 2017 was 1.8 billion kina in 2017. 2018 was 1.9 billion kina. And 2019, again, a substantial increase, almost 5% of the GDP, minus 5% of the GDP, which means that the fiscal deficit was 4.172 billion kina, 2019. And further increase in 2020 by 7.3 billion kina. which is quite a substantial increase, which means we are borrowing more to finance the deficit that is presented to us by these outcomes that we are seeing today. So we ended up borrowing more over the last 24 months than we have had in the previous time, and which means that the total net borrowing to finance this was in 2017 it was 1.6 billion kina. In 2018 was 2.04 billion kina. 2019 was 3.4 billion kina. And again, in 2020, the outcomes show that we borrowed close to 6.5 billion kina to finance our budget deficit and the shortfalls that we were encountering in our economy. A total increase of almost 4.4 billion kina over the period, which is goes to show that the level of debt that we are getting, despite saying that we are receiving all sorts of interest-free debts or interest and long-term debts, these are debts that we still need to repay, and it is continuously building up. But more serious concern is the borrowings in domestic market through the central bank, where we are still paying very high interest rates, and we are giving government bonds and treasury bills at very high interest rates. Anywhere between 8 to 12% is now what is the rates are, and these are substantial concerns that we need to be able to be aware of. So when you look at the measurement of debt to GDP, and many times we talk about, we are borrowing more or less, it is about level of affordability, whether the economy is having enough revenue and having enough growth so that it can be able to maintain to repay its debt or not. That is why the measurement of debt to the GDP is very necessary. So when we were in government in 2017, it was 31.9% debt to GDP, and in 2018 was 31.1%. But when the new government came in 2019, they tried to include what is now called the SOE debts, trying to say those are government's debts, so we must include in the calculation of GDP, debt to GDP, and as a result, it went up to 36% of GDP in 2018. But in 2019, it again further increased to 40% of GDP. And 2020, it is now hanging around 49.2% of GDP, from 31.9% to now almost 50%. Now, in 2021, it's expected to even go further up, because we are projecting to have almost a 6 billion kina deficit, which needs to be funded anyway. And funding it means borrowing more money to fund it. And it obviously means that the debt to GDP will continue to increase over that time. And just to give you a measurement of that, when we had a Fiscal Responsibility Act of 30% from the Somare government, which I already stated that credit must go to people like Bart Philemon and late Sir Michael Thomas Somare for their foresight in making sure that we try and live within our means. And of course, when we had a bit of financial pressure and trying to fund some of our budget deficits in the time that we were in government, we increased it to 35%, which was almost 1/3 of the GDP. But now it has been increased further up to almost 60%, and we are now tracking just over 50% for 2021, meaning that we are reaching the peak of the Financial Responsibility Act limits that we have set. And this is a very serious concern. 60% of debt to GDP is a serious situation of debt exposure that the nation is facing, and every attempt must be made to try and reduce it down. And the way we are spending money and where we are increasing our deficit levels and the projections for 2021 budget does not indicate to me that the level of debt to GDP will certainly decrease over the medium term. It will take some time, even after 2022 elections and beyond. It will take some serious economic management to try and reduce that, so that we will be able to live within our means. And the concern that we have is that the expenditure that we are doing from these borrowings is going to fund consumption. And consumption and administrative costs is not going to grow the economy. You have to invest in economic infrastructure, economic programs that are going to boost the growth of the economy, get people employed, projects moving. These are things that the country should be focusing on. And to summarize the debt levels, let me say this. The total public debt in 2017 was 23.5 billion kina. 23.5 billion kina. In 2018, it was 25 billion kina. 2019 was 33 billion kina, and 2020 is 40 billion kina. In less than 3 years, we have almost doubled the size of the public debt to the country. And that will certainly go up to almost 46 or 47 billion kina by end of this year when we finance the budget. And today we have no visibility because Parliament has not set and has not been able to hold the executive government to account and to able to force them to produce reports like the media economic outcomes are not being presented, MyFO, and we are supposed to present to Parliament in July. Now we are going to miss that, and as a result, we don't know how the economy is tracking. But we know that the economy is not heading in the right direction. The revenues are down, expenditure levels are up, debt borrowings are up, interest payments are up, and all these figures indicate to a continued decline in the economy. And this is a very serious concern that is certainly something that every business and every citizen should be aware of it. In terms of revenue, one figure that is coming out is that in 2020 outcome papers, it shows that there's been a slight increase in the revenues received from salaries and wages tax. And it is stated that it is because we've been able to get more taxes from employees, salaries and wages tax that they are paying. But my assessment of it is that it is not because there has been the creation of new employment in the economy. It is because of the much larger payments that companies and projects are making for employees that are departing the employment sector. The finished pays that they are getting, they are paying huge taxes for it. As a result, the collections to government is much higher than it was predicted for the 2019-20 supplementary budget. So there is quite a substantial increase. It was predicted that they will receive almost 3.3 billion kina in salaries and wages tax through the 2020 supplementary budget. And, but they've received almost 3.5 billion kina in salaries and wages tax. But the most concerning thing is that our economy is a resource-dependent economy. And of course, we have now from 2019, mining and petroleum taxes have had a substantial decline. From 760 million kina in 2019 to down to just merely 183 million kina in 2020 outcomes that has been presented, which goes to show that the sector in which gives us some revenue, or substantial revenue, is now on the decline, and it's not performing at all. And that is not likely to change in 2021 or 22. It'll take some time to win the confidence of these big investors to come back and invest not only for us to receive our fair share, but also to create employment for our people in the country. Many of our mining professionals, mine workers, engineers, construction workers, subcontractors, and all the other SMEs that's supported by this sector are all out of a job now because of the lack of confidence in this sector, and I think it is going to continue to be a problem into the future. One other number that I'm very concerned about is also inflation. Inflation is continuing to rise, when in 2019 was 3.6% inflation rate. Today it is close to 5%, almost 1.5% jump in the inflation. That is again pushing prices of consumer goods up, meaning that our purchasing power is lower, our salary value is declining, and our ability to pay for some of these goods largely because we are an import-dependent country. It is certainly a concern, but it's pleasing to note that when I see the 2020 budget outcomes, it shows that our goods and services tax has declined, meaning that we are getting less money from money we spent in the shops and consumer items, which indicate to me that we are now going back to our local food, local production, and this is where it's good to see that people are spending money to consumer and food items that will build subsistence and, of course, self-reliance for our families over many years to come. When we look at in detail about some of these different economic sector items like goods and services tax, salaries and wages, company tax profits again was on a decline because of course when companies are cutting down costs, second employees, not revenues down, they make less profits, and as they make less profits, they pay less tax to the government. And so the numbers indicate that business confidence is down, business profits are down, and as a result, government is getting less revenue from these profits that we are supposed to get, and profits that we have indicated in the budget that we will collect. In terms of expenditure, again, because of lack of reforms in the public service, we are seeing that over the past 2 years, 2019, 2020, and it is indicated in the budget outcomes that their operational expenditure has gone up again, and it's gone up from 2019 from almost 11.7 billion kina to now up to 12.5 billion kina. Again, that's a substantial increase of close to 900 million kina. That is unacceptable. We can't continue to increase cost of maintaining the public service machinery that is consuming well over 50% of our budget, and not cutting costs and reforming the public service. This reform has been going on for many years. I think it's time the government bites the bullet and implement the recommendations of the Public Sector Reform Committee, but largely aimed at reducing cost of operating the government and its systems in the country. I think it's important that the government continue to review that. Capital investment in the country has declined by almost 200 million kina. 183 million, in fact, a decline of 183 million kina in the outcomes, which shows that there was in 2019 3 billion was invested, and then we budgeted for in the supplementary budget of spending 4 billion kina, and we spend almost 3.9 billion kina, only a reduction of almost 200 million kina in capital expenditure. Again, we are not investing much in infrastructure. We need to continue to invest in that to ensure that our economy continues to grow, infrastructure is maintained, and it'll serve the delivery of goods and services to most parts of the country in the coming years. Also, the money that is going out to the provinces, again, it's sort of the budget of 2022 supplementary budget, 2020 supplementary budget by almost 200 million kina, and that is expenditure that is going out to the provinces by almost 300 million kina, 285 million kina. Provinces got less money to maintain the services in the provinces for health and education, and maintaining rural and district services. That was cut by almost 300 million kina. Again, majority of our people continue to live in rural communities right throughout the country. The small funding that they are receiving is maintaining those services, and I thank the churches who are continuing to fill in the gaps on behalf of the government and the community in providing health and education services, especially while government cannot afford to continue to cut that. Now, when we talk about spending of almost 19 billion kina, when we had a reduction of revenue of 2 billion kina in 2020, the funds that we are spending on non-priority areas, some of the feel-good politically funded projects, that have got non-priority, has not been designed, has not been budgeted for. These are things that are blowing the budget out of proportion. We are certainly living beyond our means. We cannot afford to ensure that the economy continues to rein in and be within the limits that we can afford to maintain a certain level of growth. When you look at the economy over the last 2 years, it declined by almost 3.5% in 2019. There was a projection of growth of about 2020, sorry, and then there's a projection of the growth of about 2021 of about 3%. That's a turnaround of 7%. I don't think we can achieve that. While the business confidence is down and our revenues are down in government and our taxes are down, it is not possible to achieve that. That would mean that the economy will continue to struggle, and over time we'll be able to try and see if we can work on some of the reforms that we have proposed in our last segment, last Livechat, that we need to work together in making sure that Treasury continues to work closely with our local advisors. Again, let me stress this, our local advisors. If we cannot believe in our own people, who can we believe in? Many of these foreigners who are advising the Treasurer need to be removed. They need to leave. These people can get on a plane and leave when we are struggling. Even today, they are not living in the country. And I am very concerned that in one area where we have got people who are always keeping an eye on our economy, like IMF. They normally, what they call Article 4 visits that they make into the country so they can review the performance of the economy. They have not produced a report yet for this year. Last year they produced it in April, that was for 2019. They produced it in April last year. That was the last report for IMF about performance of PNG's economy. Now, because we are not getting the reports on time, we are not getting an independent, transparent assessment, and some of this is because IMF is now become a lender to PNG. We have never borrowed in the Somalia government and in the government that we were leading. We never borrowed from IMF because of the conditions that restricted the growth of our economy, and as a result of that, the economy was always struggling. But now our government today has decided to borrow from IMF. Why are they not producing the article reports which should be telling us what their view of the performance of our economy is? So these are sort of things that I stress. Our national interest is very important. This is our country. Our people need to have a say in how they manage their country. Sometimes we listen too much to foreign advice from so-called experts, and these are the outcomes that we are getting today. And of course, I've got another 30 minutes to go, but let me summarize by saying this. I am concerned about the restrictions and the influence by government over the central bank. I am very happy that the central bank has been able to perform independently for many, many years. Central bank by law is responsible for our monetary policy. Our treasury is responsible for our fiscal policy. That has been a separation that has been since independence. Today we see that some of the legislative changes, the laws that the government has been putting forward, exerting influence over the central bank's operation, gives lack of independence to the central bank. Bank of Papua New Guinea must be allowed to maintain its independence so that it can tell the government independently that we are stepping out of line or we are doing the right thing for the country and the economy is performing well. And this transparency and accountability is lacking at present today. We have forced the Fiscal Responsibility Act from 35% now all the way up to 60%. We are forcing central bank to print money, meaning that when we run out of money and we don't have money, we tell them to print more money so that we can pay our bills. That is wrong. It undermines the value of our currency, and it also undermines the value of our currency's ability to purchase our purchasing power will decline, and it has been the situation over the last few years. One thing I want to say is that last thing is that whilst the economy is a lot more and more Papua New Guineans are out of jobs, skilled Papua New Guineans and semi-skilled and unskilled Papua New Guineans. All this work that people have been doing, and when the economy was growing over the last 15 to 18 years, and most of them are now out of a job, and they are now starting to accessing their savings in the superannuation. Now, superannuation savings are for retirement, not when they are out of a job. And it's the government's job to create confidence in the economy, to create employment opportunities for our people. That is not happening. And seeing in the outcomes that they have made legislative changes to allow our workers to access their superannuation savings, I think it is morally wrong. This is for their retirement. When they retire from jobs and they have got no income, they will access those savings so that they can be able to maintain a certain quality of life when they retire. So some of these legislative changes, our advisors and our government officials and our leaders in government must think through it properly, rather than rushing into because you think that you are satisfying the demand of our people. You are going to have a long-term suffering because of these kind of changes that we are making. And I believe very strongly that we are certainly heading towards what is I call, we will be morally wrong when we make decisions like that. We are systematically compromising institutions like the central bank, and we are now marginalizing treasury and treasury officials who are not actively involved in formulation of budgets and keeping track of our expenditure. And as a result, the economy is in free fall, very much dependent on foreign advice. And of course, when we are borrowing more, we are spending more, and when we have less revenue, financially we are becoming bankrupt. That is something that we must avoid at all costs. And I think, when you borrow money to just consume, it is wrong. You must borrow money to build an economy, and that is what we should be targeting and what should be focusing on. So I will now answer a few questions that many of our viewers have been sending through. And again, thank you very much for all your questions. And many of you, I'm sorry, but I can't be able to answer. I can't be able to answer every question, but I will do my best over the next few weeks, as I've done in the past questions, that I will answer your questions as much as I can to do that. I will also say that in 2020, I think we also increased the salaries and wages tax. I am told by our citizens that citizens cannot afford to pay these kind of taxes, and I have again stated that when the economy is doing well, people can be able to afford such taxes. When the economy is not doing well, we must reform our taxes to give him a break. And this is the time to do it, because we must be able to ensure that we put some money back into their pockets. Now, I've got on superannuation, I've got a very good comment from Ian Taratia, who's of course CEO for Nest Fund, who is of course reiterating the point that we have made. Superannuation contributions are for retirement, and they are invested on the contributors' behalf to ensure that these funds make money and of course be able to look after the retirees when they retire. So the government's point of trying to say you can now access your funds while you're out of a job, I think it is wrong. We need to correct it very, very, very soon. I also agree with. There's a question about why did Porgera close? Well, it's just simply inexperience. That's my question, my answer. Inexperience in ensuring that Porgera, as many of you might know, represents almost 1.3 to 1.5% of our gross domestic product. If you are talking about GDP of 80 billion and you work it out at that level, it represents quite a substantial amount of money to the economy. And when you have a mine like that closes down, not only the country's growth gets affected, but affected by it also affects also small and medium enterprises, businesses, contractors, all the landowners, all the employees. That has been so. Nobody gave a thought through to try and resolve those issues state by state and making sure that there is continuity, like we try to do at Oktedi. But we just went in there and shut it down, and then now it's going to be a struggle to reopen it again. And I'm very concerned about this kind of approach. People may say that will come and invest so much money because they just want to conclude a negotiation, but the actual investment, sometimes does not take place. Recently, we have seen. One example: Morobe provincial government has announced 100 billion kina investment that is coming through. We've yet to see that. Another investment of 40 billion kina in Eastern Islands. This kind of cargo cult. Day by night, investors coming in there with unimaginable amount of money. It's something that we need to be careful about. We need to work hard ourselves. We need to build the economy ourselves, and that's the only way we can achieve some growth. So I hope that we can be able to work together in achieving that. Gerard is saying that what is your stand on some of the underperforming SOEs and they drag on the economy? That's a very good question, because the key is SOEs that I'm concerned about is like PNG Power, PNG Water, Air New Guinea, and of course ports and so forth. So I think it's important that we work closely together with the management to restructure it. I have indicated in the last live chat that I subscribe to a outside management coming in, because there's been too many over the many years unnecessary political interference in the management of these companies, and we politicians, many of us, do not have the experience of running such multi-billion kina organizations. These are not small companies. These are very big companies, very vital to our national interest and saving our people. Provision of water and sanitation, provision of transport, provision of electricity, provision of telecommunication. All these are very important to our nation building, and government must have some interest in there to dictate, not unnecessary dictation, but make sure that the national interest is protected at all costs. And one example that I gave last session was about when Air New Guinea was going through some difficult times. I think it was in the 80s, and they brought in KLM airline from Germany to come and manage it. I think the managing director's name at that time was Dieter Sheffield. He was here for I think 5 or 6 years. And it turned the airline around and make it very profitable and very highly efficient airline to operate in the region. These are sort of partnerships that we require. We give the management out, leave them to run it, and let them perform the services that our people deserve. And I think that's a sort of approach that I will take in terms of managing the SOEs going forward. Governments are not good in business, and they need to get out of business. But in specifically areas where there is of national interest and national concern, and where of basic services to our people, governments must be able to participate in some form or another. Jonas says, how do you reduce our borrowings? Does government have a plan? Well, I don't know about this government plan, but the way they are borrowing money now, there is no plan to reduce borrowing. If you have a revenue decline and continue to have a high level of expenditure, you have to fund the difference somehow. And the only way to fund that difference is by borrowing. And once they have that kind of budget, in 2017, I said we had the total expenditure, including funding of free education. We had 13 billion kina total expenditure for the country. And of course, in 2019, we had 17 billion kina for. And now in 2020, the outcome, they're saying over 19.4 billion kina. So we are not declining and managing or stabilizing the expenditure level, but we are having a double whammy at the moment where revenue is declining and then expenditures going up. And if you don't reduce your expenditure down and try and build your revenue up, you will always be falling behind. And this is what our government is doing. And our next aim, and whoever comes in government in 22 must plan to reduce and cut down the size of our expenditure levels. That is the priority of any government. That must be that, we must try and reduce the deficit and then add towards a balanced budget in a long-term period. That way we will not borrow money. But if we continue to go in this path, I think we are heading towards a recession, and I agree with Boyd and the others who have asked a question about, is the economy going into recession? We are already in recession, unfortunately. Just that the government and IMF and World Bank, who are lending us the money now, IMF only lends money to economies that are under stress. They don't lend money to economies that are performing. And when they are under stress, they come and set all sorts of conditions. Cut this, cut that, cut this. But somehow they're not telling our government to cut costs. Instead, our government is increasing costs to 19 billion. And of course, in the irony is that in 2021 budget, they've further increased the budget for the expenditure by 19.66 billion. It's in fact increasing by another 300 million. Instead of going further down, they've increased it. But they have also projected a decline in revenue in 2021 from now 12 billion in 2020 down to 11 billion. So further 1 billion decline, but yet they increased the expenditure by 300 million, going up. So I think when you see that, the balance is a difference of 6.6 billion kina deficit, you have to borrow money somewhere to fund it. And if you are not borrowing money from our partners like IMF and World Bank and Australian government, you will have to print more money, and that's the direction that we are heading to. And today we are in July, and we've got another 5 months to go before the end of the year. And if the government does not introduce a supplementary budget over the next few months or when we resume Parliament, it's going to have serious problems by Christmas. And I think we are going to have a situation where we are certainly going to get into higher debts, higher taxes, and Namong Rong has said that is the situation that we're in. And maybe has said that why isn't Parliament sitting to discuss these economic issues? Well, that's a genuine question that we've been to court trying to get the court to implement the recalling of Parliament. Parliament is using COVID. Everybody else is ignoring COVID, but only Parliament seems to be the only one affected by COVID these days. And our Constitution says, and the courts have, on 3 occasions have reiterated, during Somalia government, during my government, they've reiterated on 3 occasions that Parliament must sit minimum of 63 days. I think we have only said 21 or 22 days for the whole year. So, it's a really bad precedent to set when Parliament cannot discuss serious issues like economic decline, and we cannot discuss the influence of COVID in the economy and our people's well-being, all these important issues. We can't even discuss Bougainville and its independence and the debate on the referendum. All the serious issues that are affecting the stability of the country and affecting the lives of our people. And yet, Parliament has been delayed for almost 8 to 9 months, and we'll be sitting for only 3 months for this year. and I don't know how long we'll sit there in 2022 before we go to the elections. So we have got some serious issues, and our constitution clearly states that we must have a level of accountability by each level of each level of government, whether it's judiciary or parliament. Executive government must be independent of each other and accountable to each other, and one must be held accountable. Now, absolutely, there are no checks and balances. Somehow the courts have deferred some of these opposition leaders' case up to close to August, when the sitting is going to take place. It's no point having a court case when we. So I think something is happening. I'll leave it to your judgment to do that. How can we move to more affordable housing? Very good question. I know that our government, when we were in government, we set up a housing scheme program with our Bank of South Pacific. We invested 200 million kina, and the Bank of South Pacific put 200 million kina. We insisted that the interest rate will be fixed at 4%, and maximum loan term will be 40 years. So when I borrow money, I can then transfer it, if I am no longer alive, transfer it to my family and my kids and my family. That is the whole idea. And the fortnightly reductions will be much lower. So if some of you are paying rent today, and I understand that people are paying 400-500 kina rent, you can be able to borrow up to 400,000 kina, depending on your level of salary. So I suggest you visit closest BSP branch. And that is not only for public servants. Although people think that it was created for public servants only, it is for every Papua New Guinean who wants to borrow money to build a house for themselves, for new construction of houses. It is not for you to go and buy a house, existing house, but it is for a new construction of houses. I think some of the big housing estates that are taking place in Port Moresby, most of them are funded through this program. And I hope that our people can take advantage of that, and I think this government should put more funding into that, because it's well managed. The banks can manage the loan repayment and deductions much better than the government. We've seen the inefficiency as a housing department and all the issues over many years. They should be led to manage the existing houses. And we have stated in the NEC decision, but I don't know why Papua New Guineans have been evicted from National Housing Corporation houses. NEC has made a decision during our time that these families who are living in there must be given the first preference to buy a house. Now, they are entitled to go to BSP, borrow that money, and of course buy that house. So, but there are few politicians and few businessmen and their friends running around throwing Papua New Guineans on the street, allowing these people to buy houses, knock it down, and build their empires around it. It is morally wrong. It's evil, and I suggest that the government does adhere to some of the decisions. You know, sometimes they think that past governments make decisions and we have to change it, but of course it's a prerogative of the incoming government. But some good policies they must support and work closely with it. Philip Naru said, what are your plans to reduce government expenditure? Certainly we are going to come down and we're going to stop things like rentals. Rentals have made few people, landlords, very rich. Government pays probably, I can't recall, but probably over 150 million kina a year on rents. That is why I made sure that we renovated Pineapple Building. We made sure we renovated the Government Central Building and all this, and Morata House, all these neglected offices, so that our government employees can work in government-owned buildings. So we are not paying unnecessary rent. We need to stop borrowing, so that stop, but reduce borrowings down to acceptable level. Nobody can stop borrowing. No country in the world can develop without borrowing, but it must be reduced down to acceptable levels. 60% of GDP is too high. We need to come down to 35%, back to 35%, manage it at that level. 35% is 1/3 of every kina you earn, or every kina the country earns. That we can live in. If it's more than that, we will be struggling. That is why if we can cut down on interest payments and loan repayments, we will be able to have more money to invest in infrastructure. And we must borrow to invest in key economic projects, airports, wharves, roads, bridges, hospitals, schools. These are nation-building infrastructure. They build the economy, they build a society, they educate our children, they make sure that our people have a healthy lifestyle so that they become more productive, long life, more productivity in our economy. And these are some of the areas that we need to focus our attention. This is not hard to do. It doesn't need some genius to come and tell us what we have to do. We already know what we can do. It's about looking after ourselves and our own citizens. And I think it is. I think we should do that. The other side of the equation is to increase our revenue in the country. That means we must build our economy. Our population is increasing as 3%, so our expenses will grow as our population grows. So I think it's important that we build and grow our economy. And some of the minds that are having problems, we must conclude those discussions and bring credibility to the discussions, not sifting conversations every so often. That does not give confidence to anyone. Just imagine that you yourself are trying to invest in a business and government keeps on changing the rules. Even though you have the money, you will not have confidence to invest that money. That is the same thing with big business. Many of them will employ thousands and thousands of people. Like Total with the Papua LNG. They will employ close to 15 to 20,000 of our citizens. That's a big number of Papua New Guineans earning wages and paying salary and wages tax over time. So I think the other side is, apart from reducing expenses, we need to increase our revenue, grow the economy, and make sure that we provide more employment for our people, for our people in our country. One of the other questions that Pius has asked is that why is COVID-19 funds managed by police department and PM? Well, I think that's certainly a question that you should ask them directly, but PM's department is not a Section 32 officer department where Prime Minister has got control over what invoices to pay and who should they pay. Of course, Prime Minister's department will get requests and all sorts of letters coming, but he must refer them to the appropriate agencies. For COVID-19, the health department should be responsible for it. But the reports that we are getting today is that the health department hasn't seen many of these COVID loans that we are getting. Where are they spending these loans? And this is the audit was conducted, and of course our Attorney General said that an audit will be conducted. They got an Australian company to do an audit, arranged a Papua New Guinean company to put that audit report on its letterhead and submit a bill to be paid for, which the bills have been paid for. This is the information that opposition has received. And now the Auditor General of Papua New Guinea has stated that the Papua New Guinean auditor is unregistered, is not the recognized auditor in our country. So it's quite a mess, and we're talking about billions and billions of kina of unaccounted funds that have been spent on your behalf and the country's behalf. And the Prime Minister needs to get his treasurer to account for these funds, not give us some wishy-washy response on the floor of Parliament, but give us a recognized audit report from a recognized international company telling us where he has spent those funds. Not from some unregistered auditor in our country who is not recognized by his own Auditor General. So that is, we need to continue to encourage that. I've got Smith who's asking, how is our international reputation affected by how our government mismanages the economy? Well, I can tell you that. You just give me one example of international confidence in this country and a new foreign direct investment in this country in the last 2 years. Zero. That is my conclusion to it. They've got no confidence in our economy. They've got no confidence in our ability to keep our word. It's all about trust. If you are not able to keep your word, nobody will trust you to invest what is their shareholders' money. And as I said before, they're not here to be charity. They're here to make returns. We are here to look after people's interests. We need to drive a hard bargain, but a fair bargain. And that's the only way we can rebuild the confidence in our country and rebuilding our economy. It will be certainly a very difficult task in the coming years to turn around an economy of our size with a population of about 10 million people in our country. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be challenging. It needs every one of us, every Papua New Guinean, to put our heads together and making sure that we may have our political differences, we may have our individual differences, but we live in one country, and we also are serving the same people in our country. And sometimes leaders need to take on board some good suggestions that our business community is making, some of our leaders are making, even some that the opposition is making. It may not be your idea, but it is an idea that is going to bring prosperity to our country, and we need to work together. Melissa is saying, what is your advice to the current government? Is it to get the Pogore and the new mining project going, and the fiscal stimulus to get SMEs going, and of course help reduce our personal income tax? Those are very, very good questions. Well, let me start with the fiscal stimulus to getting our SMEs going. SME is quite a difficult proposition, where we are trying to help individual person at different levels of the economy. Very micro level, a small economy, there was on the street seller, to a tucker box operator, to a shop operator, to a truck operator, so at different levels. And government needs to do is, as I said, they are not best at managing money. Whether you park it at Department of Commerce or Agriculture Bank or everywhere else, they are not best at managing money. The only managers of money and professional managers of money are the bankers and the financial systems and the financial community. Government needs to work with these people. They already have the network right throughout the country. All we need to do is set up the guidelines and strict guidelines, but making sure that the cost of borrowing that money for what we set aside for SMEs is not overbearing to our borrower. Just for example, if you go to the bank now, you may be borrow money at probably 15, 16, 17%. If you borrow 1,000 or 2,000 kina, you are paying that kind of interest rate. If you are doing payroll lending, it's probably more. And this is where our regulators need to come in and our government needs to come in. When we are borrowing money for SME, government must put up the funds that they budget into the banking system and strictly say, all right, you are going to lend at 3%, 4% to the SME. That's the only way you can get a limit on how much each individual can borrow. And of course, the bank will manage it on behalf of the state. The state is not interested in putting money in the bank to earn term deposits and interest on the deposits. It must be there to serve the people so they can access capital. And this is where SMEs can prosper. Just going out there and handing out money and handing out things, there is no certainty that some of these people are going to go around building these businesses or making sure that those projects are delivered. Believe me when I tell you this, because I know this experience from my own province in Southern Highlands. Tens and millions of kina are spent there, and there's no businesses started under the name of SMEs, and there's no project starting, and this is going to happen right throughout the country if we are not careful. On the terms of personal tax income reduction that Melissa has asked for, I want to say that there is a need for a tax reform. The aim is to reduce taxes for the low income earners down to very minimum levels and affordable levels, especially when the value of our currency is now down. Our ability to purchasing power is down. I think it is important that we revise the tax reform so that we can put more money into the pockets of our citizens. Why I say this is that because their quality of life and their ability to have a decent living standard is important on how much money they have in their pocket. And you know, one of the greatest advantage about free education was we made sure that instead of paying school fees, we made sure that the parents had that school fee in their pocket to look after the family. And government took the responsibility of paying school fees. We were able to do that for 8 years consistently. Consistently, we spent 3.3 billion kina on TFF, and that was recently reported in the papers independently after an audit was done. So you can see that we can afford to run these kind of programs right throughout the country. And people may argue, and they've got their own views, and I respect that. They say that, oh, you know, there are too many kids in schools, the qualities were dropping. But you tell me the alternative. Are we going to put that child that is right or her right to get to school on the street, and we give preference to someone else because they come from a better family or a much wealthier family? No. Everybody's got every right, and we try and improve and build on the infrastructure, training, skilling our teachers, and so forth. But again, coming back to putting more money in the pocket, and personal income tax reforms need to take place, and to encourage, of course, a better standard of living for our people. I know we are running out of time, and I will, before I conclude, again, let me say thank you very much. I will. I've got so many questions coming, so I might just extend for a few more minutes, and I know that this is an interesting session. There are a few questions that are not related to the economy, but they're coming through. I'm told that there's Macmillan who's asking about APEC audit yet to be finalized. I don't know why it's taking too long. They should finalize it and table it. There is nothing wrong with it. And you know, some of the so-called numbers that have been thrown around in public are overstated as far as I am concerned. The reality is that we spent less and we got some value out of this, and it placed PNG on a global economic map. We must understand that these 21 economies that PNG is very privileged to be part of, 21 economies, they represent over 50% of the global economy. There are 200 plus countries in the world, but these 21 economies control 50% of the global economy. Now that must be some value for PNG. Don't be mistaken about that. Otherwise, you know, we will be just a number on the side. So, you know, being part of this kind of organization is important. Sometimes because of politics and misunderstanding, people have some value judgment about how much we're getting out of this. One of the projects that we got was 1.6 billion grant for the to try and get 70% of our people on power grid in the country. That's almost 4 billion kina of value. So you know, I'm hoping that the audit reports will be presented. So let us get to the true value, and people can make the judgment for themselves on what we are able to achieve as being a member of that very distinguished organization. Now I know there are a bit more questions coming through, and it takes time for us to judge. But in fact, it's coming in the hundreds. So you know, my fellow friends, it's not easy for me to just go through each one of them. I'm trying to pick certain topics to make sure that you have a good knowledge about what is happening, and I want to conclude by saying that somebody's asking a great question about the 22 something million kina sent in the agriculture department. I mean, we all know and we have seen on social media the jubilant celebrations that we're doing at Loloata when they were receiving checks, and now they are all blaming each other who has received checks and who has not received checks. But that being aside, this is public money. They are accountable for this money. Police needs to go and investigate. When I said earlier that all our institutions of government systematically bankrupted. This is one of the things I was talking about. We are using political influence in some of these institutions to advance our own position, but not allowing them to do their job that the Constitution and the law allows them to do so. That is to protect public interest without fear or favor. But sometimes fear and favor is taking over the performance of those duties. So I think that the minister and the secretary should politely step aside and allow an independent body or auditors to go and independently, not appointed by not a Wantaim auditor, but an internationally recognized auditor to go and then independently assess the delivery of the 22 million kina. And of course, some of the other checks that are floating around, unbudgeted checks that have been paid through finance and planning, which is blowing up our budget. This is what we are talking about, unbudgeted. Parliament has not approved it, and some organizations and leaders are carrying these checks around. We all will be held accountable at some stage or the other, whether it'll be tomorrow or next day or some other time. But we all will be accountable. So let's bear that in mind when we make use of public funds and public properties. With that, thank you very much. I look forward to engaging with you over the next session. I again thank all the followers who have been following me over the last few weeks. Again, let me say this. I want to be constructive in our discussions around the issues that is affecting the country. I know that there's been few who have been labeling me this and that, but you can label me when you see me. But please let us engage in a constructive debate or a discussion, and let's help our country move forward. Thank you very much, and then God bless you. Thank you.